In this second part of JavaFX GUIs, we're going to discuss controls and how they can be added and how they can be laid out. As a reminder, we have seen these following layout components before. The stage is the entire window. The scene is part of a stage, and the scene has the content, and the scene also is assigned a root node, which is generally a layout pane, and then we're going to add the controls to that layout pane, or the root node of the scene. Here we see the Hello World application that we showed in the previous video. And you can see that that entire window is, of course, the stage. And then the scene is really all the content inside the window. That pink part is the scene. And the scene has to be assigned a root node. Now in this case, the root node is going to be a layout pane, and it's going to be a border layout. The border layout lets us organize things into 5 regions. There's the top, there's the bottom, the left, the right, and the center. Here's how these regions of the border layout work. If I were to take my window and say I was to expand it vertically, what would happen would be the top and the bottom would retain their size, but the left and the right areas, as well as the center, would get taller. Similarly, if I were to expand this window in this direction, then the left would maintain its size, the right would maintain its size, but the top would become wider, and so would the bottom. And the way the center region works is the top uses whatever space it needs, the bottom uses whatever space it needs, so does the left, so does the right, and the poor center gets anything that's left over. In this application, we have this text right here, which is a label, and that label was placed in the top of the border layout. Then we had this button that says Say Hello World. That button went to the left. And then we had another button that said Say Goodbye World, and that button went to the right. One of the things about the border layout is you do not have to use every single part of the layout. I could have an application with just top, left, center, and bottom. Or I could have one that has top, center, and bottom, and no left and right. So you can decide which regions you want to use. So our scene looks like this. This area right here is the top. And then this area over here would be the left, and this would be the right. Now, a couple things I did here, just to get this extra space at the bottom. I actually did use the bottom. But the bottom just holds a label whose text is empty. One more thing to notice about this is that if you notice, well, you can't see it, but the empty label is taking up this much height. But the label in the top is taking up this much height. Laying out your controls is a real challenge in any Java GUI, but the trick that we used here to make the top this way was to take this label, which really is just this, and add padding around it. And the padding gave it the extra room on the top and the bottom. And you'll see that when we look at the controls coming up. Now, this is not the way things normally work in a GUI. Normally, you have a border layout like this, and you don't place the buttons and you don't place the labels straight into the root node. What you typically do is, let's say in the top, you have a different node. Instead of it being just the label, that would end up being its own pane. And you can use different kinds of controls inside the border layout. So as I said, usually what you'll see is that all of these regions have their own layout panes inside of them. And then controls are added to this. This lets us have this hierarchy where you have the root pane, and the root pane may have another container. That other container can have more containers. And you can build it up this way. But for this particular example, it's really simple. Border layout, label in the top, button on the left, button on the right, and a teeny tiny little label you can't see in the bottom. If you remember from the last video, we had the start method, which began the GUI. And one of the things we did, first we made our border pane. Now you can see why we made a border pane, so I could have a top, center, bottom, left, and right regions. We made the border pane, and as you saw, we set the background color to be pink. Just a couple of opening things. Now, the next thing my start method did was it had a private static method called setUpControls. And to that method, I'm going to pass it the main pane. So let's look inside the private void method setUpControls. Again, I pass it in the border pane. First thing I do is I make a new label. And the new label will have some text. And I will assign this to a variable of type label called LBL. After having done that, as I mentioned earlier, I set the padding for the label. And what this does is, as you saw in the previous slide, this will set the inside space of the label to be 20 pixels on top, 20 pixels on the bottom, 20 pixels on the right, 20 pixels on the left. That's why the label was spaced out so nicely in the top part of the pane. Now, a word about JavaFX. There's a million things to know. This is using insets to set the padding. Honestly, it would take hours and hours and hours to go through every single thing in JavaFX. So my best advice to everybody is to get a sense of what kind of controls you want and go to the Java API library and see how to set the padding. Look at all these methods like set padding. There's a whole bunch of methods for a label. Learn what they are, learn how to use them. Next, we make our button in much the same way. It's of type new button. And then we can use another setter on that button to set the text of the button. Do basically the same thing for button 2. So now we've made our 3 controls. We've made label, button 1, and button 2. And we've set some of their properties using setters. Remember that we passed in our border pane as a parameter called main pane. And down here, this is where we actually add these nodes to the different parts of the border pane. So we put the label in the top, we put the button in the left, button 1, we put button 2 in the right. And remember I told you our little trick, we also in the bottom, we created a new label with just a space and put that in the bottom. And that's how we assigned these individual controls to different parts of the border pane. However, as I mentioned, it is more common to not put the controls directly into the panes. And what is more common is, instead of adding in a label or a button, you would actually add in another container. So containers in containers. One more thing I didn't show you was this code right here. And sometimes things don't work out the way you like. In this case, I wanted the label to be in the center of the top, but it was not. It was going to the left of the top. It was left aligned. So what we needed to do here was to take the border pane, use a static method of it called set alignment, and from there we set the alignment of the label to be a position, and that position was the center. So now my label's in the center of the top. Again, way too much to really know every single thing. The best thing to do is to get a good reference set or look at the API, but with experience you begin to learn how to set up and lay out your controls with ease. Let's look back at our start method, and we'll talk about these lines of code right here. So what I've done so far is I've been working with my border pane, but I had to make a scene, and the scene is going to be added to my stage. So in this line right here, we create our scene, and we make the scene and we send it the main pane. So the scene is going to be created, and the content of that scene is going to be our border layout that has all of our controls in it. Now we want to set the stage, and that's the last thing we'll do, and we'll call our last private static method setStage. So you can see here, one thing I'm doing is I'm setting the width. So my window is going to be 400 pixels wide. Here we set the title to be hello, and you'll see that in the title of the window. And in this line, this is where I take the scene and assign it to the main stage. And now everything is ready to go. Just one last thing to do. Take my window main stage and show it. And that will, in effect, launch the GUI so that now I can see the window that I have just created. Something else of interest, there are 4 different styles for your stage, your window. They can be decorated, undecorated, transparent, or utility. And we'll see examples of these in the next slide. And here are the examples of the different styles of your stages or windows. The first will be decorated, and you can see a decorated window has the title. It has the controls to minimize, maximize, and close. That's a very standard window. The next kind of stage we have is an undecorated one. The undecorated stage has none of that. The undecorated stage is simply the rectangle that represents your window. The other kind of window, the other style, is a utility. The utility will also have the title as a decorated window does, but it doesn't have anything else. It just has a close button. And lastly, there's a transparent window. The transparent window, you can see it, that's this white window, and it's on top of something else. So if you wanted to have see-through windows, you can make your window transparent, and it kind of bleeds in, the background bleeds into it. But this area right here, that's the actual window, and it's on top of something else and slightly transparent. And you can control how transparent you want to make that. Remembering that Java GUIs are filled with hierarchies, your stage can have an owner. And the owner of a stage is considered to be the parent. When you close a parent window, the nice thing is that all of the children windows automatically close. And a stage will always be on top of its parent window. And you may remember that from the transparent stage we had last time. That was actually on top of the window that owned it. Stages or windows can also have a modality. What a modality is, it determines what level of control you can have once your active window is displayed to you. The first is modality none, and What this means is you could have, say, a pop-up window, and you can go back to the window behind it or go to this window over here. In other words, you can go wherever you want to go, even if your application has many different windows. That's great. Can be hard to code sometimes. The next kind of modality is called window modal. And this modality says it blocks input events from all the windows, from its owner all the way down to its root. So in this case, if I had a window, and then that window launched another window, and that launched another window, that the only thing I'd be able to do would be to work inside the third window. I couldn't, for example, go back to this window or the one before it. I had to finish and close out the window that was the most recent one shown. Then I could work in the window before it, and then I could work in the window before that. The last type of modality, application modal, is somewhere in between the wild permissiveness of modality none and the strict rigor of modality window modal. And what this says, this is a stage that blocks the input events from being delivered to all windows from the same application, except for those from its child hierarchy. How would that work? Let's say we have this window here. That window spawns this window. This window is actually going to be application modal. Because that window is application modal, it might spawn another child window. Since this is application modal, what I'm allowed to do is I'm allowed to obviously work in the most recent window, but I could come back to this window. In other words, application modal, which again was this second one right here, I could work in it or any of its children. I can move back and forth. What I can't do, though, is I can't go back up to the parent window. That's application modal. In summary, a modal dialog will block all other interactions. And it forces a response from the user, and then we must deal with that dialog before we can do anything else. That's modal. Non-modal allows other interactions. You can work in any window you like. They could be all over the place. And you can work here, 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 here. However, it's really hard now to keep track of the events because activity can be happening in so many different places. It makes your code complex. And this is why Java introduced something that's in between modal and non-modal. And again, that was the application modal, which allowed for some partial modality. Let's talk about some controls besides labels and buttons. Let's talk about radio buttons. Here we have some radio buttons, and you can make a choice of one of these three options: 1 potato, 2 potato, or 3 potato. The way a radio button works, if I select 1 potato, the others will deselect. Then if I decide to select 2 potato, then the 1 potato will deselect. I can only pick one of these at a time. Here's how to set them up in code. You set them up this way. You make the radio buttons you want. You give them the names. But then you have to put them in something called a toggle group. The toggle group is what's going to allow that behavior where only one of these buttons could be chosen at a time. You make the toggle group, and then down here, you set the toggle group for each of these buttons. So radio button 1's in that toggle group, so is radio button 2, so is radio button 3. What this does is this enables you to have a form with a couple of toggles. You might want to know how many potatoes, you might want to know the gender of somebody. So you could have 2 independent sets of radio buttons. Each one of these would be in a different toggle group. The next thing we want to look at will be a checkbox. Checkboxes are easy. Here's a checkbox to send me spam. If you want spam, you check it. And that's very easy to create. Just make a checkbox. Tell me what you want the checkbox to say. We also have a text field. Text fields are areas on your GUI where you can actually write in whatever it is you want to type right inside the text box. And the way that you can do it, you can set them up two different ways here as I'm showing you. The first way we're doing it, we're setting up the text field with some kind of default text. And that default text will appear in your text box when it's launched. The other way to do it is to just make a new text field and send it no string, and that would give you an empty text field. So what we're used to calling text boxes, JavaFX calls them text fields. And then lastly, sometimes you want to have a full text area. So a text area gives you lots of rows. So in a text area, you can keep typing for longer text. What you need to worry about with a text area is you got to say how many rows you're going to allow. In this case, I would allow 6 lines of text. So there's 3, and there's 4, 5, 6, etc. The other thing you can do is you can set the height of the text area in pixels. And then this last one's really good, setting wrap text equals true. What often will happen is in a text area, you'll start writing a word like Christmas, and you'll just type in CHR, and then you're out of room. So then isthmus will come to the next line. Not what you had in mind. So by setting the wrap text to be true, which is normally what I like to do for a default, it shows you that the word will not fit on this line, and it will move the whole word down to the next line. So wrapping text is very similar to how Microsoft Word wraps text. I'm sure you've seen many user interfaces that have drop-down lists that allow you to select a single option. Those drop-down lists in JavaFX are known as either choice boxes or combo boxes. And these two different kinds of controls are very similar, though there are some important differences that we'll get to. Let's look at the choice box first. So to make a choice box, like an array list or other collection items, it uses generics. So we'll have a choice box of strings. We'll call that choice 1, and that, of course, will equal a new choice box of strings. Now, these controls very often have an array list of items. So after I've made choice 1, I can then use it, and I can call the method getItems. That gets all the items currently in that choice box. And I can add them one at a time, or I can use this nice addAll method, and that's going to add all the strings that I pass to the addAll as parameters. So we'll add an EDM, rock, country, and hip-hop/rap. Now the next line is choice1.setValue, and it's going to set the value to rock. Now we can see this in action over here. There is your choice box, and you notice that rock is the selected item. And if I click on this arrow to drop it down, it'll look like this. And notice that rock, even though it's the second item of the list, is the one that's selected. So set value gives you a way to have defaults. Now, let's do a different kind of choice box. We did a choice box of strings, but this is where it gets exciting. I can do a choice box of other objects like songs. So I made another choice box, a choice box of songs. And what I'm going to rely on for the songs is the toString method of the object class. And now notice that what I can do, here I have this variable called songs, which you can't see in this code right here, but songs is an array list of a few songs that I would like to utilize in my GUI. And as a collection of songs, I can do a for each method on it. And using lambda expressions, for every song in the collection, I do what? I go to the choice 2. Choice 2 is my new choice box. I get the items, and I individually add them song by song. So when I come here and I'm adding the songs to this choice box, I'm using, again, the toString method of the song class, and that will determine what strings are displayed to the user. But in reality, I know that my choice box, even though it's displaying the strings from toString, that the choice box is basically a collection full of song objects. All right, now let's take a look at combo boxes next. So combo boxes are very much like choice boxes, but there are two important differences. Difference number one has to do with length. A combo box is better for a very long list of items because you can add a scroll bar to a combo box, but you cannot add a scroll bar to a choice box. Choice boxes are great for small lists of choices. The second thing actually comes from the name of a combo box itself. Why do you think it's called a combo box? It's called a combo box because in the drop-down, you are able to make a selection, but you are also able to type in your own value. So it gives you the ability to choose from a selected list or type in your own value. And you, the programmer, can control whether that capability is turned on or not. But if I look at the code here, again, very similar. I'm making a combo box of strings first. I'm still getting the items. I'm still adding all the strings for my favorite TV shows. And I can also set the prompt text. And the prompt text will be a guide to the user as to what I want my combo box to do. So combo box 1, combo 1, was a combo box of strings. And then we can also make a combo box of songs, just like we did with the choice box. And here we can say the prompt text is pick a song, and you can see that pick a song appears right here. And just like the choice box, I'm going to loop through an array list of songs and add each song to my combo box. Now, remember that we said that a combo box is different from a choice box because you can enter your own values. And right now, this particular combo box, combo 2, is not editable. And the way I can tell that is that my prompt text, pick a song, is in dark black type. But if I had changed this up and I had made combo 2, if I had made it an editable control, what would happen? What would happen would be that this pick a song would be light font, and then I would be able to simply type any song I wanted right there, and that would be the choice taken. The last control on this slide is a list control, and a list control can present things similarly. A list of choices. You make a list view. In this case, I have 2 list views of strings. And very similarly, I can take my list view, list 1, get the items, and add all these strings to it. But notice there's something else cool that I can do. I can set the orientation to be a horizontal orientation. So here's what this looks like. I have this list control where I can, now you click on the visa, that will be selected. Click on the discover, that would be selected. It's a really nice, compact type of control that you can make horizontal, and that can help your interface conserve a lot of space. There are many more kinds of controls. There are sliders. So here, when I'm asking about the current temperature, I could slide that little circle up and down and it would pick a value for me. That's interesting. The other thing we have are tree views. Here's a tree view where I can organize things in categories. Here I want you to pick your favorite character from Game of Thrones, and you can open up, you can expand or contract all of these families, and then choose your favorite character. Of course, it would be Tyrion. But you could also have a tree view that allows multiple selects. So here I'm picking my favorite characters, more than one. And again, I can open up the tree and I can pick, say, Aegon Targaryen as well as Daenerys Targaryen. And that's a different type of tree view that can allow multiple selects. And then lastly, then this is perhaps my favorite. There's a table view, and this lets you add in objects. Here's like a song with its title, the artist, the release, and whether it was featured in a movie or not. And then you can use the table view to make a selection of one of those songs. What's nice about this is that this uses those complex song objects and builds columns for each of the instance variables that's present in a song. More complex, sure, but also makes for a very grand interface. Wow, this was a long video. Sorry about that. There is so much to JavaFX that you really have to dig into it deeply to learn it. Here is a book that I think is great to learn it if you're a beginner, and definitely use the Java API. The more you learn about JavaFX GUIs, the better they can be. Thank you again so much for watching, and our next video will actually make these GUIs work. Right now, we just made them look pretty, but we have to add the event handling. That's coming up next.